Welcome to Table for 92, element number 67, holmium. It's number 67 because it has exactly 67 protons within its nucleus. For holmium, we're cooking up some smorgasbord. For Stockholm, of which holmium is named. It comes from the old Latin name for Stockholm, Holmia. Man, there were just so many elements found in Sweden. I mean, like, good on you, Sweden. Most of the rare earth elements were discovered in Sweden, and so a lot of them have names that are kind of indicative of Sweden or just the Nordic countries in some way. You know, whether they're named after the village of Ytterby, terbium, yttrium, so forth, or after the region itself, Scandium, or for a chemist that was from the region, gadolinium. So much stuff found up there. And because none of the rare earth elements are found in food, today we're making a traditional Swedish smorgasbord to celebrate yet another element discovered in Sweden. The word smorgasbord kind of gets used in at least, American English to describe any varied assortment of things. I mean, if you type smorgasbord into Google Scholar, one of the first things that comes up is an article named "Of Chicken Wings and Frog Legs, a Smorgasbord of Evolutionary Variation and Mechanisms of Tetrapod Limb Development." So yeah, it's used in many different contexts. Yeah, a smorgasbord is an assortment of different foods, very popular in Sweden, and has been transplanted all over the world. I would even venture to say that the smorgasbord led directly to the popularity of all-you-can-eat buffets, which, is American as it comes, but probably came from smorgasbords. Alas, as far as we know, smorgasbord was created by the wealthy in Sweden in the 1300s or thereabout, where a collection of breads, butter, and cheeses were served before dinner. At that time, it was called brandvinsbord. Later, instead of an appetizer, it became the whole meal and transformed into smorgasbord, which literally translates to something like bread and butter on an open-faced sandwich. So the only recipe we have today is a nice, dense Swedish rye bread to go along with everything else on our smorgasbord. To start, I'm gonna mix together 3 3/4 cups of rye semolina flour, 1 1/4 cup of bread flour, 2 tablespoons of baking soda, 2 teaspoons of salt, 1 1/2 cups of molasses, and 2 1/2 cups of skim milk. So here we are with holmium, another really interesting element that is incredibly useful, but we don't really hear a lot about it specifically. It's one of the lanthanide elements, the rare earth elements that are so important right now in all kinds of technologies, but I can guarantee you depend on one of these rare earth elements in your day-to-day, whether it's in headphones, smartphones, megaphones, xylophones, saxophones, francophones, maybe not those last few, but the other ones, definitely. Rare earth elements are essential for us to keep our modern, I wouldn't want to call it decadent lifestyle, but, we got it pretty good, right? And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, the rare earth elements aren't actually that rare. It's just that they are incredibly difficult to extract from their sources, and for a long time, the rare earth elements were more of a curiosity or even an impediment, but in the past few decades, all these different uses have been discovered for them. Holmium is used in some pretty amazing tech, but first let me explain how it was discovered and what led up to it being used in so much stuff today. The whole history of lanthanides is really fascinating, but also ridiculously complicated. I've almost lost my mind just researching this stuff because they are so difficult to extract from their source minerals. And because they're so similar, all these different elements, there have been many accidents along the way. Remember, the first lanthanide element discovered was in the early 1800s when scientists were just figuring out the basics of the planet and didn't even know about germs or viruses yet. And here they are discovering elements. So to extract these really difficult elements from the stuff that they're mixed with, it's really confusing and frustrating. Not to mention so many lanthanides were discovered on the island of Ytterby in Sweden and are named after them in some capacity. I mean, it's already confusing, but here's some of the names. You got terbium, erbium, yttrium, ytterbium. It's ridiculous and I hate it. Anyway, holmium is one of quite a few elements that were independently discovered around the same time. It really is strange how often this happens, but yeah, it usually ends up being whoever publishes the findings first gets all the glory for discovering it. In the case of holmium, it was the Swedish chemist Per Theodor Kleve, who unironically rocked some serious sideburns. he had a sample of erbia, which is erbium oxide, and was able to extract any impurities from that. This is a really common way for lanthanide elements to be found. They're always like kind of hiding in trace amounts in one of their other fellow lanthanides. Like the first lanthanide element ever discovered, years later they found out that there was actually 2 other new elements hiding inside of that new element that they had discovered. So that's how confusing this stuff can be. Pers Theodor Kleve separated holmium from erbium oxide, while another team in Geneva, Switzerland did basically the same thing. Both teams, these are teams of course, found new colors while studying the atomic spectral lines, a green line and a brown line of their extracted samples. But Pers Theodor Kleve noted a green line he named thulium, after like the mythic name for Nordic stuff, and a brown line, holmium, for his hometown of Stockholm. Yes, he found 2 elements. But get this, the pure holmium that was discovered ended up having yet another undiscovered element within it, dysprosium. The Royal Society of Chemistry has a good sentence describing this. We cannot be certain that either group had produced a pure sample of the new element, because yet another rare earth element, dysprosium, was extracted from the holmium. You see why I hate this. I mean, I love it, but it's so confusing. Of course, too, the smorgasbord is wildly different depending on the, different part of Sweden that you're in, or what part of the world, really. If you're in a coastal area, you're gonna get more seafood. More of a country area, you're gonna get more meats and cheeses, but the mainstay, no matter what, is smoked herring and gravlax. Sweden is, after all, basically underwater. It has the most lakes of any country in the world, an enormous coastline, rivers everywhere, so, some really good freshwater and saltwater seafood. It is interesting, though. The Swedes that emigrated to the US, where I'm from, didn't really bring the smorgasbord tradition with them. In the 1870s, there was a famine in Sweden that drove many to leave for the US and settle mostly in like the upper Midwest. Part of my family came to the US from Sweden at that time and brought with them this awesome rolling pin. Yeah, like this is from the 1870s, or it's probably older, but my great-great-great-grandmother brought it with her. One solid piece of wood. You can see how well used it is. It's actually like weathered away in the middle, but also you can see, people back then, after all, it was a famine, their diets weren't as good as ours today, so people were a lot smaller back then. Like, look how much smaller their hands were compared to mine today. Yeah. It's just awesome that I have this. I love it, and it still works great. But yeah, so it was restaurants in Chicago and New York that popularized the smorgasbord, not the immigrant families that came here. And eventually, those restaurants were all like, hey, what if we collected all the cheapest foods we have and let people eat as much as they can for a flat rate? That'll show the communists. And so now we have the Golden Corral. I mean, like, there's a direct line between these like early kind of fancy smorgasbord restaurants in Chicago and New York to all-you-can-eat buffets now. All right, so like all the lanthanide elements, holmium is a soft silvery metal and has no biological role in the human body, but is found in very, very small amounts in the body, and does affect the metabolism of certain bacteria, but we don't really know any more than that. There's still a lot of studies going on. And just like the other lanthanide elements, it's not found in nature all by itself. It's not found in a pure state. As I mentioned earlier, it has to be painstakingly extracted from, well, more often than not, other lanthanide elements that have a grip on it like a Vulcan nerve pinch. Just yeah, my frustration with the lanthanide elements and all the other shenanigans is starting to come out. So let me tell you about why this annoying group of elements is so cool and so incredibly useful. One of the funny things with the lanthanide group is that most of them, were discovered in like the 1800s, but there wasn't a use for them until fairly recently. Like the first to be used was from yttrium. They actually created the red colors for the newly invented color TV sets in like the 50s and 60s. After that though, like it just exploded. The rare earths or lanthanides just became extremely important. It kind of reminds me of how they were discovered. Like one discovery led to the next one. I've actually read a wonderful metaphor for rare earths. It's like adding magic fairy dust to stuff. It just makes everything run better. Magnets, headphone speakers, medical tech, like all that stuff. It's magic pixie dust. Holmium though, boy howdy, magnets. Yes, holmium has the strongest magnetic force on the periodic table. So in chemistry, the term dope has a whole other meaning than it does, out on the street. It means a substance added to improve something else. So holmium is used to dope yttrium aluminum crystals in lasers that can be used to treat certain cancers and can vaporize tumors. So that's pretty awesome. And again, the rare earth title really doesn't apply to most of the rare earth elements, but yeah, holmium is the 56th most abundant element in Earth's crust, something like 20 times more abundant than silver. But holmium is not that well known among the elements. At a certain point, the lanthanides, because of how similar they all are, seem kind of boring on the surface, but the deeper you look into it, they are all just like wonderful elements and super useful, but you know, frustrating in the naming and the discovering and that stuff. So this smorgasbord is not meant to be eaten like we do in the US, where there's like an almost artistic approach to it, where you try and fit one of every dish on your plate in an array of gluttony and food architecture. I'm sure, you know, like we've all seen it where someone has like geniusly pulled off the greatest buffet plate you've ever seen. You know, something that looks like, I don't know, the Leaning Tower of Pisa of food. But no, in Sweden, apparently, I've never been there, but apparently everything's supposed to be eaten by itself, like tried by itself, one dish, one plate. Of course, the bread and the condiments and meats and cheeses, you know, they go together. That's how you make your smorgas, the open-faced sandwich. All right. And of course, to finish off a smorgasbord, to make it truly Swedish and authentic, you need the lingonberry sauce from IKEA from Edison, New Jersey. That's fantastic. Better than Golden Corral, I would say. Thanks. See you next time.